The content, views, and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the City of Bremerton, BCAT, their officials, or their employees. Hello, I'm Elise of Joyful Plant. Today we celebrate fall colors by rendering leaves in watercolor crayon. Let's begin. In order to do this project, you'll want to collect some autumn leaves, watercolor paper, and watercolor crayons. These work quite similarly to watercolors, although you draw on the paper first, then add water to blend and soften the colors as you like. Benefits to this include variability with the texture and control of the water. There are infinite ways to approach this type of project, but we'll begin with simple observation, looking at the colors, shapes, and textures of the leaves, and then some loose sketching. This can loosen up your artistic hand and allow you to really enjoy the colors, whichever season you're in. Autumn can feel sad or even depressing to some people, depending on how the seasons affect your mood. I try to embrace the autumn season, enjoying the colors that are present in the leaves when the days shorten and the chlorophyll disappears, leaving pigments we didn't realize were there. Deciduous trees shed their leaves in autumn when there's less light to conserve energy and prepare for the winter and then the spring foliar growth. In order to properly observe the leaves, we have to understand the colors and the color wheel. Watercolor crayons allow the ability to scribble on a piece of paper. This is the Arches cold press with a fine or rough tooth. If you are able to find the means to have a more professional set of watercolors and fine watercolor paper, it dramatically changes the result that you'll have with the experience. We get to know the leaves in their changing colors, and as you observe the varying hues of the season, you can take a walk and find the ones that really appeal to you. Some might still be green, losing their chlorophyll. They'll start to show their other colors such as yellows, oranges, reds, purples. This particular set of Swiss-made watercolor crayons is a blend of the more common fall colors and this is usually more of the warm hues on the color wheel. It's helpful to use blues as shadows or even blend some of the colors. Getting to know the process that your garden creates helps you as a gardener to appreciate the different seasons of the plants expressing themselves, as well as helping you to plan how to keep interest in the garden through the seasons. When we do creative work, we're able to keep our brains active into our later in life stages and helps us stay sharp and enjoying something new each day. Try not to put pressure on yourself. So creating a color wheel can be an excellent way to start a project, because once you have stock of your inventory, then you can start to observe the leaves that you've chosen and get a sense for which colors you might use to represent them. It's okay if your colors blend a bit. They tend to blend on the canvas while we're working on it. So you can get a sense for the greens and the particular hues you would like to use with the pigments and start to appreciate the colors of the season even more than you would when they're just falling off the trees. And if you match them up, it can be a fun exercise for adults and children. So once you've created your color wheel, we can change to a sketch and to estimate the composition of each sample. We can start with a simple sketch. And one of the reasons I love this type of watercolor crayon is that oftentimes when we are new to art or we haven't been letting ourselves create, we might be a little more shy about what we put on the page. The watercolor crayon really helps us let loose and scribble almost as if we are small children again. It doesn't need to be exact. It can be really fun. You might find therapy in this process alone. So much of our lives has to be exacting, and we might become afraid to mess up or experiment, which can be detrimental to the creative process. So use the colors that you just learned about, sketch, and then blend. And you can use a paper towel to control the amount of water if you'd like. It's important to draw what you see, not what you know. The leaves might be curling a different way, and it's okay to make those observations loosely, have a wild interpretation of what you see. You can always start with the abstract and come to details later. I like to keep a paper towel nearby so we can then pick up some of the pigment where it ends up being lighter. That really creates an interesting dimension. You can have a lot of control with this, leaving those scratchy marks or working the brush to blend them in. You can even create a firm edge or some kind of serration of the leaf and continue to work with it. Usually watercolor can take several layers in order to feel complete, and always finding that perfect balance of serendipity with what looks to be a fine and finished piece of art. So you can use watercolor crayon over a wet piece, especially if you would like to emphasize the veins in the leaves, or if you'd like to add other colors that are just barely showing through, such as this tiny bit of green down at the bottom. Remembering that there's no wrong way to do this and that the self-expression is helpful. I'm using a round quill brush that helps vary the thickness based on how much I'm pressing. And you can always rinse your brush, dry it, and pick up just a little more pigment to keep it interesting. That really shows the dimension. It doesn't have to look exactly like it does in real life. You are the artist and it's your interpretation. Just simply doing this process helps honor that bit of nature. It's helpful for a garden to attract its gardener, and that's what brings the attention it needs to thrive. And you might look at it and notice you'd like a little more of a certain color. So scribble it in, channel your inner child, and enjoy it. And if your leaf is a little bit more ragged, it's okay to have some little dots or continue to see some of what we may consider imperfections. And remember where the light's coming from so that you can get a little bit of a surprising piece of shadow. One of the interesting things about this fall season is how the light can vary so much and change the appearance of the plants. And especially when they're drying and curling, there's a lot of variability. So if you're so inclined, you can even play around and create a little shadow. If you see it, you can draw it and blend that in. Nothing is perfect. It's only the value of the process in general that counts. And there are ways to emphasize where the leaves curl over, especially if you have a few different layers of work. And I try to put just the detail in only about 10% of the piece so that it suggests a certain shape, but it lets your mind put the rest together. It's kind of fun to commemorate leaves that are dying and falling off the tree, becoming the part of the soil again, as well as decomposing produce or flowers that have wilted. We'll try some of this bright sumac, brightly colored leaves. I like to start by outlining it with somewhat of a neutral color and start to notice the angles. Again, this is not exact, so I like to start with the central vein and get a little bit of a sense for what those leaves are doing. This one has a particularly serrated edge, and it's up to you and your interpretation how you'd like it conveyed. If a leaf has a vein that is lighter than the rest of the leaf, you can use a liquid frisket to block the entry of that particular color. Or if it's darker, you can use a skewer or a toothpick to indent the watercolor paper in a way that finely shows the detail without too much overworking. You're just using some simple S strokes and C strokes. You might even do the leaves on the end before you fill in the middle, whatever helps you visualize so you get the proportions. And the more you draw and sketch, the easier it is to paint. So this can enhance your skills for regular watercolor painting as well. So now we look at what side the light is coming in, and in this case it is from above on both sides. Usually we have a sunlight coming in from one angle, so we can emphasize one side with the darkness or the pigment. Sometimes a leaf has deep pigment in the middle, and leaving some white space or lighter space can allow the brain to imagine the depth of that leaf and notice the shadow. As with everything, we don't want to judge ourselves while we're doing the art. The critique is something that happens sometimes partway through or at the end of a piece. And it's important to stay in that creative mindset of non-judgment, creation. We have a little bit of green up here. So we'll add a little bit of that without wanting it to turn brown. So the more you know your color wheel, the more it helps understand what will happen with the blending of colors. And it's always more fun to have a lot of variety in color. It can be very soothing to start to blend these colors. You might have more surprises than you expected if you are new to this, and it's okay to be bold. As long as you don't consume the material, there's basically nothing you can do wrong. So play around with it. Try not to judge your creation. And see if you can learn something about the plants. If you are in a place or a time of year that doesn't have quite as much of the fall color happening, there are lots of ways to either preserve leaves. You can sometimes preserve them in glycerin or sometimes in wax paper. And some leaves will even keep their color if you use a flower press or a leaf press. You can make that simply out of 2 pieces of wood and some paper towels. Find the time for your creative arts. Gardeners especially can be very busy in the summer and autumn and even the spring. So scheduling in your art can help, or creating reasons to do that, such as thank you cards or Christmas cards, any type of fall greeting. Many worldly cultures have taught us how important it can be to embrace the time of year that can be challenging otherwise. We have numerous holidays that celebrate the harvest and embracing our inner selves as the weather starts to turn. There are lots of ways that your family can do this, between the Scandinavian hygge concept of bringing in beautiful pieces of nature to decorate the mantle, and other wonderful global ways to recognize the light in the darker seasons. Keeping our community strong, we're able to make connections with others who do fun crafts and even bring your product to market. So you can put the final touches on your project, embrace the rough patches. If you want to go in for finer detail, such as insinuating little serrations in the leaves, you can feel free to use the brush tip so it doesn't create quite as much work. Let the brush do the work and clean up the edges if you don't prefer how it is. And it's okay to leave anything that feels like an imperfection. If it looks a little sketchy, if it doesn't look real, it is art. Take a little look at it, see what can be surprising. Might add a little bit of blue for shadow. With watercolor, we don't use a black color for shadow necessarily. It's more of a challenge to bring in the color that might be opposite on the color wheel to let that contrast really blend in, be a little less stark. And you can use the blue for the shadows beneath if you'd like to show that it's sitting on a piece of paper. This allows you to draw what you see, challenge yourself to do something uncomfortable. So real sketchy blending here, nothing exact. Sometimes it's more appealing to the eye if it looks more natural. You don't have to overthink any of this, just make it fun. And remember that as we appreciate the beauty of the earth, it can thrive and nurture us more through our relationships. It's how plants evolve, people develop, communities thrive. So you have the flexibility to Play with all different colors of the leaves and observe your backyard and try to appreciate the different colors of the color wheel so you can see exactly how to depict the leaves in the way that gives you the most amount of energy so you can prepare for the winter and your spring growth. Okay, we call it good. Today we celebrated the fall season through watercolor. Thank you for joining us. You're invited to share your work on social media with the hashtag gardeningthroughart and find more tutorials on joyfulplant.com. See you next time.